the idea of some kind of framework. And finally, for some reason, how to measure it. And in fact, that could be printed or painted on the surface. It might be the effect of something else that's on the exterior. So all of the students or a lot of the groups are containing their objects from the first exercise. And so these are thought of really as kind of chambers for the most part. And the hope was that, through these, through their discoveries, they might be able to figure out ways of producing kind of visual impressions or formal deception. So, that's the task. I think each studio's or each group has approached that in a slightly different fashion, and all that Tom and Chen can before kick it off with the project.
Hello, everybody. So, our project is titled Ghosts in the Box. And so the idea of the ghost, conceptually, we're thinking of it as this idea of what once was, right? So this idea of memory sort of manifesting itself into our sphere of perception, right? Kind of superstitions, how we generate meaning from things that are familiar that have like a particular pattern, right? So this project, we wanted to focus on illusions and deception. To sort of play this idea of ghosts, sort of how certain patterns can click in and sort of evaporate away the ghost. So, so this idea of deception, we wanted to play with depth, shadows, and action. So we're using different tones of gray to sort of misread the depth and the sort of reading of the geometries, particularly in the base and the framework. And in terms of sort of how we thought about containing the models, we have 4 volumes, and each sort of touch on the ground in the volume. So I think thinking back to our mid-review, one of the comments we got was how can we sort of play with the elevation of the models. So that sort of way it touches the ground sort of helps give an interesting elevation. So the way this works is you sort of stand at one side of the pentagon and at a 45-degree angle, you sort of look to where the squares line up to where it keeps perfectly the square of the geometry. And in that, it sort of helps you guide your way, the striation of the pattern, and also just sort of help line up all the lines and things to help you look for the model that's inside.
The logic of the geometry is the volume of this pattern of this and the base we were doing. So using the pattern of this. So the pentagon here is really just a combination of like 2 perfect square and like overlapping at an angle. So you just evolve the idea of this octagonal shape based on that, and eventually even the patterns of the surface really just came from that orthogonal language from the base.
We're on the view. We're having some fairly structures, something in the business, and we attach the string track to it, so we should have that part on the board. And that doesn't work with the string track content to take down. The structure will go into each other, and that will not create a surface. So, I'm using to go to the for horizontal line and have for different rectangular objects standing on the ground, and also for the orientation with always attached to the ground. We initially have 2 boxes having the edge of the rectangular box attached to the ground, and we finally changed for these vertices attached to the base and having the container located in each of word corners. Yeah, and for the first half, it's really kind of hard to like create the whole model and so we decide to create each box separately and then try to combine them together. And also we have like this opening for and also the patterns aligned with the opening. It helps to us to more focus on the model inside. To incorporate the evolution of the classic rectangle from each other.
Another thing to notice, we designed this in parallel projection, so it does not account for the 35mm length of the focus of the eye. So if you want to look at the digital model, you can actually spin that model around and actually look at the regions more active.
Something on your board.
Sure, yeah. So on the boards here, you can see how like in a normal parallel to the ground, you sort of see the least reading, so it shines and you align it perfectly.
Is AR important or is it
I think it might be.
I just have one other question. I mean, I really love the just a lot of things about what you're doing with the cubic forms, their relationship to the ground, and the play of the patterning on those forms, and then the projection on the ground. Just a question: is the ground projection? I was trying to read that drawing, a cubical drawing. Is that the frames of the cubes that are projected onto it, or is there a continuation of the square patterning? This square patterning on the ground. I was trying to find that moment you were talking about, and it looked to me, and maybe I misread it, that the ground projections are really from the frames of the cubes and not the surface treatment that you put on the shrink wrap. Is that right?
Yeah, it's an extension of the frame.
Yeah.
By newer forms.
Yeah. Yeah.
How is it extended? Is it extended like in orthographic projection? Because it extends beyond, right? So what's the methodology for projection?
In designing, you have the model tilted at 45 degrees and just sort of looking at seeing where the structure comes out from that exact field, just continuing to overlap. And also in this sort of, because it's in, you'll start to see them align in different views. So the way we design the space is like how they intersect and connect each other in impossible ways. So another thing that was with the deception, impossible geometry and the way that beam members connect each other impossibly, how they overlap. So that was like another idea.
Because they're like full intersections, right? They like pass through one another. Yeah, possible. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, just to follow up on what I started saying, I really love the decision to use cubic forms for this, because it sets up a great canvas for you to then play with and work on. It also, somehow with the cubic form, it makes more sense that it sort of encourages a viewer to like approach it, as you mentioned, across each side and view it and trying to find that moment where the graphics are being kind of applied across the form. So it's such a it's a nice play between the masses, that surface projection, and the projection down to the ground. I really like that you did the ground projection as the frames, because it is something different. I wonder if there was any, because I was like really searching for that moment where the striped surface treatment was then translated to the ground, or I guess vice versa, where I could really connect those frames back up through to the real mass, the real frames. Which I think maybe I just didn't find the moment, but it is possible, like, because you have opened up some of those cubes, which I think is another great decision. It shows that impossible joint, I think, a little bit, and it gives a sense that these things aren't perfect, masses, but there is some sort of play between three-dimensional and two-dimensional. So it's just a really nice sort of mix of all of these things happening in one space. So I guess I want to take another spin around the model and take a look and find some of those keyed in moments. But I think it's really great, and the drawings really
they describe the ideas super nicely as well. So.
Want to give us a backstory behind the hidden treasures, the little objects that live inside of it?
Backstory.
The backstory behind the little hidden objects that are within it.
Oh, yeah, just sort of these illusions that they help, just help you discover, these objects. And they're from the previous project.
Oh, cool. They're not, everything is extremely cubic and orthogonal, and the objects within are not, they're not really from the very organic side.
How things overlap when you're overlap. Is that something that is entirely visual based, or did you have some decision? And also, are any of those points here, either white lines all over the actual picture, or is just yeah, this is not usually speaking as black. It's not another thickness of the case.
I'm trying to take this between and you're biasing one versus the other, right? I mean, we can talk a lot about the experience of being at a specific angle, but then the process is very much need driven, right? You said you have to look at the drawings in order to see the overlap. Is there a desire or intent that the 3D version of it does have this sort of that you are able to see this sort of effect or deception rather than just seeing 2D? In other words, is there a process where you actually bring the 30 millimeter into the projection initial drawing that you created, or is that not the intent? Because right now, I noticed when you talk about the effect, you definitely bias the drawing because the drawing is where it matches up perfectly. Here, it's Bob. That not that that's good or bad, but just a question as to how you're reconciling the two or not. Sorry.
So yeah,
Is there any desire to correct the 3D model that to have parity, or is the idea really that there is that sort of discrepancy?
sure. Actually, yeah. Designing it visually helps create open the strikes. But physically, with more time, we would have needed the actual and possible geometry onto the beams using a projector and sort of project the guidelines on one view and having the same action. Actually.
I mean, this should be my question. You guys, not only for what we see right now, but for the life of the project. And it's really interesting exchanges in the digital and physical. I think it wants one more level of feedback. I think, guys should think about that. And photograph that. I was completely interested in something on over there. It was incredible. The project held together there somehow. But I would also love, for the feedback as possible to then render some impact to geometry. So the things that we're looking for between the ground, the ground, and the object, they have even more display. It's really interesting to explore as an extension and not. But I think there's a desire from you guys to engage, right? Now for distraction. Yeah, so I think that would be really interesting.
Yeah, I agree that the encouragement for interactivity is definitely I'm
I want to walk around and stuff. I'm still like looking for that moment. I wonder, I love the base one. Is it possible just like help me draw out like maybe where this shape, any of the shapes might come from, like from the single frame up here, from maybe this finish one. It looks like, and I had to guess, you took the frame, put it out the surface, and then from a couple vantage points on each side, and projected that frame down. Yeah, so that would mean that some frame over here, like let's say this one here, right, should be like the top portion of this frame, or maybe this one.
Actually, it's like this is like an extension of this, this extending out. And then this, looking for, this frame right here is actually at the perfect moment.
Oh, so it's not, because I was imagining that it's not like a big 2D, like the whole final term, like you're up there somewhere in ortho, and you make 2D, and then you just project that down there. Is that not?
Oh, no, actually,
Oh,
it's from that view, using the lines of that flat and orthographic view of the model, sort of extend out and using the base to or almost sort of make a new geometry. The
So
outline.
this line here is this edge from up here.
Oh, from here.
Oh, from there.
Yeah, so
Okay.
so you look, standing here, you look there. We start to see how like
Oh,
this becomes
all
like a new shape.
I got it. Yeah, that's awesome. Love it. Because I totally misunderstood. I thought it was the opposite of that. And I was going to suggest that you do what you did anyway, which is because then you can see, it's nice to be able to see the object. Now you're going to see the projection on the object. If you done the reverse, which is what I thought you guys did, and all of that would be hidden by the surface of the mass.
Yeah.
Right. So yeah, no, I get it. That's great to see that you can go between the ground projection and the ground extension of the object and have it at the same time. That's super nice. And then maybe just also about the base there. How did you make sense about coding and with the various grades? Is that also related to some of the masses and how they are arranged? Or
Yeah, actually, it's more evident in the drawing, but actually in the structure, you don't see that as issues kind of attachment wrapped to the structure. These are the shades of gray are supposed to represent shadows. So if you look at this, the lighting angle in which you painted, that is different from this lighting angle. It's sort of contrast the volumes as they overlap, which helps create the impossible geometry and to distinguish the individual faces in which they sort of there's the same logic here. Also, yeah, just the contrast and hopefully possible.
yeah, I think it's great. I think there's like a lot to unpack here and a lot to kind of figure out. Somebody now is understanding what the process was. Maybe it's, I don't know, maybe it's your desire to make it not so easy, but I wonder if there would be any way, and I think this is really absolutely different. But if there would be any way to further connect, like, this dark line up into the thing that it's projecting from, just so that, because right now you have the painted brackets and volumes, and I want some easy way immediately into your project visually, even if it's just in one moment or another, and you can let the rest be as kind of rich as it is right now. It's like, okay, now I know what the game is, now I can work around it, now I can find more of those moments. But yeah, no, I think,
I wanted to ask about this the material. I know a lot of conversation about the shrink wrap itself, and I wonder, is there any other exploration of the shrink wrap? Was a lot of it going into how you actually work with it, how pliable it was, or how able you were to sort of connect through the forms? Because I wonder, there are moments like this where I say there's sort of a stretch between the forms, and there are really only like sort of two details, like two moments of that, whereas everything else becomes much more of a sort of flat panel, and I wonder if the material itself is that much part of the much part of the concept here. How much of it is part of the concept? Or is it you had to deal with using shrink wrap and therefore you used it in the way that you did? Because it seems like there are these sort of these moments that don't really feel like the overall idea. Because I can imagine how the material and the way that you're sort of applying the pattern in both this sort of three-dimensional way. There could also be a dialogue between the material and how the material stretches or distorts or sort of changes that. And therefore maybe there is a very marked difference between the 2D and 3D, and that's okay because there are different methodologies and there are different ways of shooting the project. That's kind of a leading question. But in terms of the material, is there, can you just talk a little bit more about that and how you apply that?
Yeah, actually, the material is what helped us generate this concept of the ghost. Because what generated the small images the shrink wrap, we wanted to actually sort of empty structure. Material quality of the shrink wrap, press things into it, hold the shape, which sort of helped us generate those. Which then eventually led to illusions. So there was like an intent to shrink wrap, but honestly,
True. I really like these moments though where it really starts to sort of break open and these intersections happen, and it really does give this kind of interesting complexity where the dimension of the three-dimensional bar and then the actual 2D application actually has this kind of friction that I think is pretty interesting. Whereas moments where you just sort of see it painted on the surface, it doesn't feel like the sort of deception or effect that you're getting for it. Like everybody else, like others have said, it's very rich and has a lot of ways to think about it and read it.
I really like that material comment. Like just thinking out loud, like what ways, like could it be pushed further? Not that it's easy again, the project that you want to do it in that, so but like are all the materials, so most materials too, they're relatively opaque, right? There's a little bit of transparency where you can see the frame beyond it. And I only ask that because if you were talking about being inspired by shrink wrap to arrive at the ghost concept, right? So I would think that if there was an opportunity to have material or shrink wrap that has like a little bit more of that translucency to it, to give it that that sense that you are kind of looking through it. It's not only the hollow object that you can understand because you open it up, but the hollow object because you get to see somewhat through it. So there could be maybe something about that if there was another properties. And then the other thing which I thought Chris was like alluding to or mentioning, like what are ways, yeah, you could, not that you would want to deform your printing, but I know I saw you guys in the shop making this, and you sort of half wrap it and it's kind of loose, right? Material, and then you shoot it up and then it becomes taut. And I wonder if, like for instance, one way to play with material quality could be, and this is very difficult, I know, but like if you painted the graphics first in the kind of loose condition, right? And that is a true projection where loose on a loose, almost wrinkled pattern, and then you hit it with the hair dryer and allow the stretching of it and work kind of those graphics so that it's like it takes the material quality as part of the process of projection and make it something different. Because it's like shrink wrapping and other things forward, like not only like what does material give you, like transparency that moves, but like how do you push or allow the material to push back and give you something new.
I like that it does seem like a challenge with the product is it's so perfect in the drawings that it's been very unforgiving when it comes time for fabrication. Like there's no room for every single thing that diverges from the perfect line is going to stand out. And so a strategy where you can actually embrace the fact that the material is going to screw everything up and let that feedback come. I like that. That or just find a way to,
fabricate something.
It's always amazing though, when you find new things out for the project. Also, when Daniel was talking, I think you guys should also think about livability, right? And how you want it to be really read. I mean, there's architectural legibility, disciplinary legibility, and then as it goes to the world, public architecture is another legibility there, environment. So I think the more kind of maybe blatant connections you make between the cities and reading, or elements that allow the general public to feed into something that unfolds with rich artificial groups. It's really interesting about this model of the semester, but also of their design. It's a lot here. Really beautiful work.
Great. I think that relationship, the feedback, physically producing. A lot of your work has done this really great. Develop this orientation and that implication to get that under. I think it's also interesting about designing something rather than visually putting it out there and having that difference, having that disconnect with what's happening in kind of perfect world when you're designing it versus here. Like I think a lot of times in this conversation that second level feedback that can be interpreted here and probably muddy some of the things that you do visually as well. So I think they're all amazing comments.
Congratulations.
I'm going to start with this honestly, two couple of works. I asked him to look at lakes, to look at forms of interaction, we started in our container project, first project, we built a cast, which was then captured in a series of frames or frameworks. I asked them to work consistently with a certain diameter, edges, vertices, because bigger scale project I want to work with CO2, which is a fun material, but it's also unforgiving in certain ways. So these guys got a very quick handle on how to bend that are running together, and then got what they felt also welding some connections that it was canned up in the end. So there's a lot to do with like 3 weeks. And then each of the groups, which you see today, took very different approaches. I did ask them all to cite their containers virtually in the space. It didn't have to be in the space of the model, but somewhere adjacent to it. And they all took different approaches for that, and allowed that feedback into what they were doing with the projects. Many of the, I also encourage individual groups and pull elements from their original projects, not having to use, but each of the groups oh yeah, I did also ask them not only to work with the frames and mask, but to develop some strategy of texturing or patterning the surface in terms of palimpsest. I think it's maybe ambitious, a lot to deal with in 3 weeks, but each of them also had some strategy to begin to code or code basically their platforms various across each of those. Okay.
Hi, I'm Sophie Matt. So our title for our project is called National Music. For our Hyperlapse year, we really wanted to incorporate certain aspects of our so we really wanted to develop like more conceptual language that reflects certain movements or concepts from each one of the project, which then became the driver for our entire model. We were able to develop a core concept which was strength and movement. A really good example is like the double curve heights, which was directly like this type of concept and application really was what developed the entire design of the model. We really wanted to see how many things into the design of our model, whether it be literal.
Where you guys find our inspiration is amazing. For those who don't know, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Right. Each of the was so there are 2 aspects of that we celebrate all the things. One is how the pipe, how they are moved on the pipe is derived from the shapes of the section. The other thing is the piece itself. The design leads to our plot. So that was an eye. Yeah. Even for basically, therefore, they're like essence diagrams, those are like structural idea of marketing models. This one is like elements that will be the measurement model, and then you go through these things basically. So right. So and then basically animated animated graphics created by board. So that's this can come off. So you guys.
Yes, as Owen was mentioning about the orange color and the materiality further reinforce the relationship of part to whole. As the pieces towards the central mass, the entire mass is registered as monolithic whole. And then as you slide pieces away from the mass, the orange color is revealed to further reinforce that connection. As Daniel was mentioning, we began to experiment also with concepts, so this idea of layering our geometries to then interpret a trace of what was there before in different layering. So the graphic that you're seeing on the base is actually a projection of the shadows of the movement of the pieces. As the piece moves along, the shadow that describes that movement is projected onto the base, so that you can understand the trace and the path of where the piece is coming from and where the piece is going to. And then also the patterning of the structure here and the white edges that were painted along the map
are to help you see and understand the structure of the map itself. So we didn't want to conceal the composition. We wanted you to actually understand it, and we wanted the white edges to explain how the map was put together.
Obviously, we have to work with the types of things, like very idea of plotting them on these giant sheets. So we would basically render a little background here. Then the MATLAB method is very like old types. And then put the angle measurement for accuracy of the software angle construction. There's a lot of cutting and that's a big market for 2 sections like this. And so they're basically like a rounded drill bit that connects to and into the basically a half circle is all of the system is using like a full point. This way we can have everything together and the wall. We found it so that you can see what's right here. People will yeah, basically all the copper together. And then we assembled the pipe church, and then we worked with the mastery. Yeah, I think they're all manual flavors, so then we everything super precise. So we couldn't bend the pipe exactly. So we tried our best based on like where we should go. And then yeah.
I think the last aspect that was mentioned before we talked about it together is that because we were inspired by the based game, something that we were really interested in for our model was encouraging interaction and play. So as Owen was mentioning, the reason that these pieces can come off is so that you guys can come and interact with the structure itself, and so people are encouraged to be a part of the structure rather than the structure standing alone. Thank you.
Thank you.
You can take it home. Yeah, if you guys want to get a better look at these as well, the roll up the drawing.
I like to move it to the outside block to the block here. So is there a reason why all of it aggregates on the start rather than the down? We're going to have a sort of game, they can all be disputed all off the back. So why do you start with the center and not with radiating out? Encourage them to sort of figure it out.
I think because we were like that these two but I think it was also part of the structural choice as well as to how right would interact and also just like looking at our applications as well, most of our masses are located in physical. So I think it's just grabbing. Go for it. Yeah. I would say moving from the digital to physical, the offset of the material things aren't going as perfectly, but I think it turned out pretty close. Yeah. Three.
Yeah. It's like, oh, yeah.
Yeah, and because there are four pieces, the movement that the pipes describe and the concept describe of each of the pieces is derived, I think as Mark mentioned, from each of the containers. So I think as Douglas was explaining, his container model is a straight protrusion. So the piece is probably along a straight edge. My container works with a lot of ideas of repetition and moving towards the center through these double pipes. So as Mark was saying, we have these two pipes that are used as an organizing framework for the model, and this one represents line. Marges the pink one there is kind of about expansion and a diagonal separation. So her piece is moving along this diagonal pipe. And then Owens is really interesting about directionality. So, you know, and everything kind of converging to the center. So his piece moves along this structural pipe converging towards the center.
More at the scale of playground furniture, more kind of larger scale thing. It's like I constantly have seen this flickering between the scale of say a very large architectural model and a very significant architectural model. At the same time, you know, there is like in this playground, overscale playground furniture, or is it meant to be, you know, totally massive and we're just in scale that here. I'm just curious to know, like, how do you imagine what you imagine the scale of the model?
Well, I do think it's at the ground scale. I think deriving the idea from like the maintenance toy is obviously a different scale of that, but it is perfectly at this size for a child. There's the drawings that we printed out, you can see like the elevations. You have kids as like interacting with it. So the scale is.
I think that, I'll leave it at that. But I mean, that was a whole life. But like you can, and you do this by play. You do this by, I got news for it. They celebrate the unexpected. They celebrate the stopping producing happen. Spaces forces us to act in a specific way and forces us to develop habits. Third word, that is that habits are that. Don't celebrate the unexpected. So in that sense, I mean, like I would love to see this at 1:1. Jumping from the furniture scale to the one, but the scale is only a question of the size of the structure of the system. I love the connection with the replays game. And I mean, I should draw you first of all, like celebrating. I love the way that it plays with my ball. I think it's very trusted surfaces. So, I mean, assigning too much meaning of the initial ball that works part of the story that is the child, instead of getting access to this one expected teacher. And again, I mean, I think that there, perfect to say that this speed was there, but now the speed is there. And it needs to kind of hide itself. How do I think that? The color is it's a really nice way of kind of expressing that. But again, so far, like it stays at the level where like I can read the one-to-one. The last thing is the idea here was that the price come first. This iteration. The fees come later.
basic height, your pipes are, run this purposes, osmosis, if we can change it.
Yeah. There's one moment where you took the seats off and actually remember that this was disconnected, and that was exactly what it was. I was thinking, if you could actually physically rotate that and you could just create a series of channels that different paths that provide along, you have a lot. Great. But also, the other thing I would say is right now the Google pieces are always at a very small scale, but the math is always stay quite static. And I think that there are opportunities for pieces to well, maybe and there's this as we're going through, we're starting most of the small pieces about that one. But maybe here, what actually is the most massive component of it. That is not so much odd, so much odd and smaller scale things, but thought of it as like thoughts, all of it. So I think shows you that they reconfiguring the path, but also be not just smaller ones. This would transform entirely. Like right now, and even when we remove the small pieces, we're still able to kind of understand the singular map.
Part of the culture is doing, part like once we have one thing that's moving, oh my God, one thing is in motion, now I think everything is going to do something happening. And so we need to go back and be like, how do I either get rid of or make it
I'd echo those comments too. I had the same feeling, and something about the scale of the pieces, the scale of the frame, just kind of a nitty-gritty there, where even the way it's articulated, you almost imagine these larger forms or change. You can imagine, is there just one hole, or there, so there's a bigger, like there could be 3 or 4 different configurations, or 5 different configurations, or configurations that make it be able to come back to a hole. Because there's something always a little disappointing when it looks like something can do something that they can't. And so you see all these sort of pathways, but in reality, it's just a portion of it that can move a certain amount. And even in its resting position, like what is that relationship between the frame and the object, the frame and the solid? Where it's like a fragment that just sort of. But there were moments like this one where you start to see this echo of the cutout versus the profile of the frame, and how can that happen with some of the other edges? And how can you reconfigure this now becomes a support, and then this becomes a support, and then there are different ways that you can lock it in. But lots of different possibilities. I think maybe it's that the scale of the beat that maybe is what you're sort of latched onto. So it's not, in that beat game, you're not really moving large chunks of volumes. You're really at the scale of this sort of small scale. And that's not to say that the large volumes can't also break apart and become different scales to the manipulation. But I love the playfulness and these trying to figure out like what are the different possibilities for the form. I mean, I like in a lot of these, it's a lot about obviously it's about casting. And in some of the ways you've articulated your system, it's an interesting sort of take on casting. So it's not casting, sort of cut away and sort of sticks in. But I think there might be some inconsistencies with how like this gets engaged down here versus the slot versus the rests on top. And then there's definitely like, I'm not sure if this is meant to be the front side because when I go to the back, it feels compositionally, it feels a little unloved. So that part is not part of the game, but that might also just be that that's where you are with it right now, but I understand.
Pick up on yeah. Yours is completely engaged with everyday version. But I also think that was really, something else. I have to go to here that have so much more. But I feel like it's not there. Built. And, within this place, there are notions of, interior, defining of a threshold, so many things that I think are latent here that are just right. So, we did this measure, right? But the amazing methodology. Video, it has incredible. Allow this object to, that also has on the notion of policy, right? Height, then you get into virtual. Because of that, they go through their shop ritual. So I think there's
That methodology, so certainly that this idea that this feedback will be never like one is never set in stone, but it has a way of working. Create one, which then creates another, go back to the other one, and another one. They all obviously feedback loop of who's the user, what are the what's the idea between these different systems, right? Always going back, and I think it's going back to how the other systems affect the other one and continuing to sort of iterate based on that. I have to feel that many of these.
One thing I want to say is, scale. So, if you think that this scale is that's something that's right now, or just have humans motorized landscape. Area that speed, and that's not large, that's the slow section of it. Something yeah, these are all good comments, and those were other ones that are pretty yeah, scale, speed. How much further you can push it, have it be both legible and understandable at the game as you want it, but then have another layer that will be part of that might be further exploration of concepts of that. Some areas not medical scale carry this right into the next project. So toy, all in between spectrum.
Unless there are other comments, guys, and it's-
难道这应该是虚拟机？这时候我们就得记得，这就是我，那你们自己你让我看到我更快了，没有，我在想到黑色，就我们是那个纤维线，你外面也有一个片，对，我们都用什么颜色？然后还有。你先做久了，这样写的，就是讲讲我们这个设计其实很随机，因为我们是当时是倒过的，是这样的，我们把板倒过来，然后去我们手机边有这种，这种空间，然后放在高。然后我们就是主要两个，第一个就是主要框架，然后还有三个，然后面，我除了里面还有，然后这个也面，所以我们在做的这些就是拍了，做了之后给我拍照，然后就 OK 把这个下来我们就做好，然后就开始，就是很人为的，就这样去把一端接到这儿，然后看把那个。然后就是学，对，我们去探索，去找一些好看的，但是这种我们没有东西，有点，是，正好，对，这个好，这个是不一样，对，这建议，因为装那个瓶子，它是装水袋的，对的，是的。然后框架就是那样，就这样去固定嘛，固定好框架之后，我们再把这个这种mesh这种纸面就铺上去，就穿过来， 因为你看这个钱它当时是这样吊着的，而且你是相当于搭块布在它上面，它会自己收东西影响下来。然后首先把一块布从这儿开始结，然后再接到那一边。
哦，难怪呢，我就在想你这个是很自然，这个
是
它本身是软的，软的状态下你
我们组另外一个不一样的病，然后你现在做到比较科幻的，然后这种，对，你看我们那个同学说，我们这石头很难用六是吧？哎呦，我就怕这一点。可以啊，看着很这个，所以你的定位是在一个非常一个外形。他们是一个故事，这是一个外星星球类的东西，对，是一个这种感觉，然后来到地球上，然后然后它是两个像那个珊瑚，然后就是它达到底是时间，就是已经都侵占了这个地方，有基本上的感觉。然后我觉得它本身就是说话，对，枝叶状，对，它对，人这个主要还是就保证早上对，也没有说，也是边吃。他们组也是边吃吗？这组就是上次他给打分，不是，我觉得挺，上次他这个第一块，如果换成啊，对，他是很多哲学，对，他们是挺难，你看人家说那个过过，对，批判的问题，知道批判，这个也是刚才那个就可以给他们，被你看到好多年公司的那个，是那个胡老板那个，这也是技巧法，这也是技巧法吗？这个老师定的主题是啊，这应该是 playground。也没有，他们主要就是去探索那种形式的拼接和这种色彩的搭配 ，pattern 的那种。哎，这种还可以有直播吗？在直播是啊，在直播啊，啊，就是Zoom，对，那会有人看到我们在这里？不知道，我不知道有没有关注，你也不知道有多少。我觉得也可以，我觉得。哦，这个颜色好像，这个颜色太跳了。就是爱看他们少，所以他们有个人要滑。这个跟这个很像哎，这个都是这种很像，很像。有点滑水上。对，他们4个人有1个人一直在滑，就是你说那个老婆念 JD 的那个。对。
还在我的场外场地，就那种，啊，你们
hear me?
Typically, there's two pieces of tape, but
Honestly, I genuinely think that we just need the tape. No?
I think everyone's, I think we're gonna do it with.
Okay, fine, I'm gonna stop.
Love it.
hell,
Yeah.
one, if we want to mention, please link to. But I don't know if do we want to mention this.
If you want, you can maybe just leave them there, and then if anybody asks, oh, what's this? Like you can tell them, oh, these are prototypes.
Okay. Well, just make it. Like through a kind of Zoom.
Oh, that's cute, actually. So before there. Sorry, myself. Yeah. No, maybe one.
Wait, look, do that.
Yeah. Which one is more? Oh,
Poses.
yeah, yeah. How to. This seems very. Stop. Oh,
Oh, okay. Okay, so. Yeah. Then you bring whatever piece.
like I'm gonna be.
You want to hold them. But I'm afraid that we obstruct this chat also. Yeah, why not? I don't care. I think we want to hold on to this here.
No, I'm not.
I think we will, no.
Oh, it's okay. Yeah. Yeah.
Talking about all the time.
There's something beautiful in that. So that it really is just like a temporary. I told her, okay, like, I'll probably try to. She was like, you could like that shit, not that shit. For most of the guys are big. I think it's from understand that it's union, the true shape pattern. I don't like it. I don't like it. I think we could look at it for how it is. It's not like. Things were we. Skill is definitely.
You're gonna win. You're gonna win. No. They're like Japanese people. Like, you know, go around. Okay, right here. You can go. Just a hand. Yeah. No, you. No. You're right.
Did everyone else?
I can do one. Oh, your people.
What's your idea? No.
Okay. Gotcha. And we'll take group lunch and back. Now you're on interview. Wait, Kyle.
But you guys should. Yeah, take some measurements. Hands over to your. 4:30.
No, I don't. No, I had a mail away. Yeah. Want to do my now? It kind of looks intentional. Right? I feel like all this shit. Everything needs, they're so grown out. We're ready. I'm really impressed with like how well this last day. Now, it's never like. Right after.
Good?
Holding it there.
Okay.
Okay, maybe we'll have some drama.
Like, the one presentation yesterday. You getting the presentation?
Performance, yeah.
No, it's like,
I know, that's why I'm holding it. It's so
We have no ideas.
Sophie.
in review or?
He doesn't know who anyone is.
I only know your guys' videos.
He was like, which studio is that? And I'm like, okay. Well, we're new too,
Well, we're new.
so we didn't know anyone anyway.
Yes, no one knows anyone.
I'm Toby.
But where you?
Daniels, right next to.
Yeah, we're that guy. I know.
I think when you were, with you, when they were there.
Oh, I was
You were
there.
there.
Yeah. I like, when I was with the mother, sort of up there. Yeah. It's my project. I don't know, just like, it's like a very quick deadline, a very large scale. Like, you look at all the projects from 2000. And they had 4 weeks. So. It just felt like a little bit of unrealistic expectation. Yeah, but at what cost, right? What do you have to sacrifice? Sleep? Our mental health? Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, I mean, maybe you should go to concussion. I got a concussion. The particle board fell on her butt. It was like, I was moving it up and down to the bookshelf, like, weeks ago. I don't know, my perception of time is so blurry. And it was like, leaning against the wall, and then someone was on the floor, and like someone was sitting on the wall, when I came back up, I was on the ground, picking up the particle board from the floor, and the one that was leaning against the wall this time, right on my head. I screamed, there was a scream, there was some tears. I'm here, tell my story, I survived. It's just a little disrespectful. We spent like hundreds of dollars each on this, you know, and for a and like it's like also like took over our entire lives. Like our, you know, like it's like not only money, but like time, energy, passion. It was our whole life, and it's like kind of like for what? Like it doesn't feel very rewarding or useful when we're just put in a corner for 2 days. And like yeah. And it's yeah, I remember. Yeah. Just like it would have been nice to have them like even like have like a station around campus.
You might need to work with a paint. No, probably.
Yeah.
I think some.
I don't know. It's just funny that also be like, oh, take it outside and take pictures of it. How am I supposed to get up? Well, yeah, it's not related. So everything, we drill everything into each other to get it. Yeah. Yeah, we got undrill, yeah, some projects are easier than others, but your case is very. I agree. I know, the taking time, like, I'm not sure, if you, that's what I told them, like, if you manage it, I mean, you're gonna have to take it out anyway, Friday, and if you feel like it didn't break and you can put it together for some pictures again, we're just gonna, I'm gonna take a piece. I think everyone should take, we never keep it. Yeah. So I'm gonna take a piece from the studio. Yeah, sure. Well, it's part of the process. Oh, no, okay, you've got a piece for me, you're gonna jam it. Like, I don't know how I got that. Okay, you keep me, I like that I go. Yeah, but they want to go with each other. You know, yeah. Made it. For sure. Well, sure you photograph it like there's no
Well.
then you take some. It looks like a picture. I have been also very maybe it was good that the character here because what if it's yes. You are from here. For me, it was well, that's oh, I didn't know the sound. Yeah, but I had like it's great. They actually take all weight.
As trying
Maybe I was thinking the one that
oh, sorry. yeah, right. Yeah. Sometimes you
It's going very well. But like we started somewhat crazy and pretty good. Pretty nice, but it took like 3 days for one piece. And then yeah, and these ones were really good. And then so the highlights on my theory are
Then you have a curl.
yeah. I think why did they work?
So because I'm gonna talk about it actually in the presentation, like, originally that was our intent, but then after the review how this one turned out.
They're two layers.
Oh, I saw you cutting. Wait, this is paper. I saw you doing this. You know, I was delicate. I was delicate.
Yeah.
Okay, time to start. It's being late. Okay. Whenever you're ready.
Everybody can scan the 2 QR codes are right here.
I'm gonna open up the circle a little bit so we just see the GR.
Okay, I'm Kira.
I'm Diego.
And this is our project Trend. It's an interactive installment designed to foster play and creativity. A user can interact with it by adding, removing, or rotating the individual modules. And doing this can create different formal structures. And then also, if you're looking at it in orthographic view, it can create different networks and have geometry in the orthographic view. We chose bright, happy colors that are somewhat reminiscent of different children's toys like Legos or Connect and Rubik's Cube, because we really want people to feel that they are able to walk up and touch it and use it, and that it's not like a museum piece that they can't touch. In our design process, we were looking at symmetrical modular units. So basically, we wanted all the units to be able to fit with all of the other units if the user wanted to do that. And in our research, we found the Truchet tiles. Basically, what happens here is you can have any pattern more or less within a Truchet tile, but the lines just have to connect at the midpoint of the square, and that's how they will go together. This is the most commonly used one with the curve, but you can also have linear lines or like other shapes and things within the tile. The problem with this is that it's very two-dimensional. So our team worked to pull this into 3D. And we started out with just a really basic like concept similar to this, where we had 3 curves and each curve is touching the middle of a face or 2 faces. And then we made them into pipes and we got this sort of form by, again, rotating them, moving them. We wanted to take that one step further, so we created 3 types to use within our module. We have this curved piece, a linear piece, and then a more solid piece. We thought that this would add another dimension with areas that are less dense and then areas with views that are more dense to our figure. So the components are different variations, and we have three different codes to fix these three components. But make sure we want to rotate them with different locations, so each end of the component should be in a set level with each other. So this code will do the function with them in a correct location, and make sure each unit could be set by themselves in a load balance. And then they just download to this list onto the ground.
For the race cars, as you can see, there are four white cars here. And we try to follow our components about which a larger scale that we want to have different areas. And the base was made of two layers of plywood and illustrated.
So in terms of fabrication, all of these pieces are actually hollow, approximately a weight of 4.5 pounds. They're lightweight, which actually makes them very easy for both children and adults to play with. The material that we chose was MDF. As it stands right now, about 90% of our model is MDF. The other 10% actually is cardstock on the edges of the curved units. Originally, we also intended for that to be made out of MDF, but after troubleshooting it on a single piece, we noticed that the scoring method that we wanted to use actually didn't produce like a clean result. So then we actually did end up just using cardstock, painting it, and stacking it to meet the thickness of the piece that we already had. Yeah, in terms of the supports to the fabrication of it, those are also hollow and MDF. If we had been given an extra week, I think that we definitely would have chosen to make the supports out of either like a 3D print material, yeah, or like either use just plastic as a cast, because right now the 3D supports like the cores, the white pieces, are holding like the most weight. But given the time constraint and the cost constraint, we are confident we make the right decision.
Are they all unique?
I'm sorry.
Are they all unique?
Yeah. So in terms of like, they're all unique in the sense that like the color differs for all of them. The way that they're oriented right now, or I guess like the color organization, is that it's the same color on the face of the curves or the angles. So if it's red on one side, it's red on the other. But then the loop that goes all the way around is a completely different color.
Sorry, I was talking about the joints.
There's three unique joints, one for each of the configurations. So there's one that has three curved pieces and that has its own joint. There's one with the three rectilinear pieces which have its own joint. Because here there's more space between the rectilinear and the curve, so then you see different. And then again, this more square piece with the two rectilinear.
Sorry, I misunderstood your question.
That was good.
Going back to the color designation, though, this organizational method having one color on either side and then a different color on like the loop, again permits for like different color variations depending on what orthographic view you stand at in relation to the structure. And I think that creates a kind of almost intrinsic pattern that changes. So, you know, that's a rationale that we had for why we just chose a solid color as opposed to juxtaposing a pattern or like a hatch or something like that. With the animation too, you can see that there's this kind of play of like moving it at 90 degrees, almost kind of like a fixed cube. And like that is how you go about reordering and rearranging using the
So this is our original core by producing all base. They have a smooth surface and easy to define with each component. But because of the time limit, they also the material are extended to make the other division. It's the evolution of our core and it's complex one. We simplify them by a clean surface And also we do some notch in around each piece, make sure we could assemble quickly and quickly.
That was fully great. Okay.
I think,
In
yeah.
theory, yes.
Yeah.
But in this model.
Oh, you can put this one.
I wanted to feel the weight.
Yeah.
Oh, can I use one?
No, so
No.
this is one unit, so it's all glued together, yeah.
Ah, okay, and this is.
Yeah.
Can hold it?
Because a 538 is the next.
Oh, okay. I would think that a child could hold it.
Can I just hold it?
It's not, you can, but it's not supposed.
Okay. Okay.
I think there's actual.
Yeah,
It's one for the gift.
yeah. Should
Very nice,
theoretically stand like this, and then, let me bring it over actually this way. Stands like that.
Oh,
It's gonna work.
Now you can see this.
That is the orientation. So, you can hold.
But now we can.
I think the guy stuff is so smart.
Also potential to have it at different scales, so there could be maybe like a scale for smaller children and a scale for, teens and adults. Just for the weight issue.
There's a great precision in the development of the system, but it doesn't feel overwhelming in a sense. So there's still enough openness in the arrangement, especially in that scale also, which makes it, I think, very powerful. Curious about the color, just from like more detailed comments and questions, but let's say these bands, which seem to be the connection between the pieces. I'm curious about their rendition because they feel more like the white connector pieces, but they're colored, I guess, in their unique color, but still seeming to belong more to those pieces. But I'm curious if they could also become more like the connector pieces because they seem to have a similar role in being part of the system interface. And that's not about whether it's rigorous or not. It's just, I think it's the readability of the part because they're a large part of the pieces disappear in these sort of colors, which makes them look quite different from when they're standalone. Especially the banding that we described is almost without even on the exposed surfaces, where you would think you could see it. So that is maybe one. I mean, functionally that makes sense, but from the continuity and readability of the part to whole, if you will, they seem a sort of an outlier. But doesn't mean it's bad. It's just maybe that's one part I could imagine could be resolved a bit further. And then the vertical columns are also interesting because they basically, I guess, the custom length for the parts where cantilever whether one is stacked. You have to describe those, but they are also system outside systems, similar to the bands. I guess you call them like that. But they also give it a much more like tectonic reading because it seems like they address the forces and the flow of forces that bring the system to the ground without going through the units kind of cascade. So I think all those choices make it sort of feel very resolved and quite powerful. Thank
you for bringing attention to the longer connection pieces because actually in our research we were looking up the history of the Touché pattern. The origin comes from this man named Sebastian Touché, who actually developed a pattern while looking at ceramic tile patterns on the side of the canals. So from that, we started playing around with the idea specifically of the cantilever, that form that you would see under the bridge by canals. And then we realized, in an ideal world, it would be fine to have these units kind of just cantilever out, but structurally it wasn't feasible, so we had to develop a piece to kind of achieve that. In this iteration that we built, if you see it serve a structural purpose. But if you actually look into our proposed virtual model, they actually exist as like spiders, like, you know, they can be functionally, or yeah, they can be like functionally integrated, or they can be ornamental in that sense.
I congratulate you on the sort of craft, even though there's so many parts there, the craft is really impeccable in terms of the short amount of time you guys have, your ability to fill the volume at a substantial capacity. You know, the colors, the sort of curves, everything. So well done. It's a really beautiful project. I'm just trying to think of this, you know, in all of the cases as kind of move forward as this sort of scales up, how you kind of start to take some of the ideas with you. And I just can't, for some reason, I can't help but think of circulation within this, you know, in terms of the project. And I'm kind of interested. I mean, there's a lot of interesting projects that you can look at in terms of circulation. I would say something like Scott Cohen's I-beam competition is really interesting because circulation goes up and down, but it skips every floor and it goes through each other and has escalators. It's a great one to look at. But the point is, what's interesting is that a lot of these kind of are really linear systems, right? They're all like one hallway or whatever, it goes everywhere. These become interesting aspects that kind of breaks up that sort of linearity, you know, even if they are not physically circulations, but they could also be sort of new corridors and start to link these others. So I think it is kind of peculiar. These pieces, they seem a bit added on. You know, they almost seem like an afterthought, which I don't think that they are. But I would hate to lose that role. You know, once it expands, because it seems like that's one of the greater discoveries of the project. You know, I love these kind of pieces. I always wonder how one starts to kind of reconcile the difference between that, which seems to be a pretty straightforward logic of these kind of elbows and diagonals, with these much more complex intersection pieces, which are really fantastic, but also have their own kind of discipline, right? There's sets of 3 of them. You know, they're not custom, they're not bespoke at every point. They're just conditioned within that. I think that's a really lovely discovery, and it seems that that's beyond the origins that you're talking about tiles on the Spanish or the sort of Parisian subway or whatever. You know what I'm saying? I think this is something, you know, always when you do these projects, I think you have, you know, certain things that kind of bring in, you're mixing them, putting them together. It's a good marriage when it produces something other than itself. And I think that these things are something other than the ingredients, which are really exciting to figure out a way to maintain those.
I think modulated, by the way, maybe you did mention that I just missed in the presentation. I think modular.
Yeah, so there's
It's a unit. There's 3, no?
3 discrete units.
Well, but this piece, for example, is not here, right?
Yeah, we have 3 different.
Three different kinds, which every kind you have a different joint.
Yeah.
So you have 3 actually, it's not the same.
It's just because the spacing between, say, this one with the linear is much larger than it is in the curved unit. So like this joint is much bigger than that.
I wonder if there'd be a way to maintain the differentiation, the level of differentiation you have, while trying to optimize it by making all the joints smaller. I mean, maybe there's a way to, you know, with a couple more passes, maybe you can actually achieve that. I think you're actually pretty close already to introduce, I think, even further intelligence into the piece. And another person I was thinking, this more or less obscure architect, American architect called John Johansson from the Harvard side. He has this project where he has this basically the same idea, but these are scaled up so that the can actually run inside, and they are connected different volumes. It's really, really crazy, and you may want to look at it. Yeah, anyway, I mean, it's really great to see all these projects in you play. I was thinking that play is such a difficult notion to live with, right? Because there's this sense that you can make something playful by making it colorful, by making it curvilinear, by making it look like it is playful, and you might just stop there, right? And I think that's a little perhaps problematic, right? Like as designers, as architects, you want to have a little bit more agency as to what happens. And when the idea of play comes in, that becomes difficult because the very notion of play implies a certain spontaneity and a certain agency that's displayed onto or moved onto the user, right? So how do you deal that? How do you deal with that complication there? So I think it would be great to develop, and I think this connects all the way back to the beginning with I think Eduardo's comment. You could develop a certain range of possible ways of occupying the structure relative to the specifics of the structure, right? So that this is curved exactly this way, and it is this particular color in relationship to that particular color, and that you don't want to determine exactly how people are to occupy or appropriate this particular piece, but you want to develop a certain range as to how they think it can be occupied, right? You cannot just be completely hands-off and say, this is a playful structure, looks playful, end the story, right? No, right? That's just falls a little short, right? You want to have a little more agency over that, right? And even further to that, you can try to develop or see how that starts to inform also the shape or and the complexity in the form of your project, right? So try to keep it in mind. It's a really exciting project and a really exciting thing, I think, for that reason, right? It's difficult to embrace it.
Are components required
It almost.
It's very iteration.
Also the curve really helps with the positioning point. No, yeah, again, another magical situation. And we've gone from the simple surfaces, ultra thin surface, interlocking perpendicularly to a thickened surface and the system of surfaces that collapse and sandwich with one another to create different ways of sliding and interlocking and to achieve all sorts of various performances and the effects both virtually and physically. And here we go to the expansion of that to the volume. And it's really fascinating to see. It looks like you all kind of talk to one another and develop this project collectively, as a full studio. Because also your presentations are super smart, yeah, very very eloquent and fun. Like you definitely have fun. Like the care that you put into everything that you produce is amazing. Like all of you, like I'm talking about the whole studio. And then in this particular, just to maybe continue the conversation about how this can become like a series of tips, ingredients, logics, tactics of spatial organization moving forward. I think that there are a lot of let's say of information that you can still take from this system. For instance, you're like the way that the white piece, the joint, that if you were to turn it off, if it was a chroma key and it disappeared, you would see all of these impossible curves disappearing, which I guess it's
because we are trying to cluster some transparent material in the code, so it will be if these pieces are transparent, like line.
exactly. And if this translated to the virtual as something that disappears, and it's part of the gaming logic. Anyway, but the way that these come together, right now you're usually centering them to the joints are centered to the longitudinal pieces, not to the colored pieces. They don't have to be that way. Like you decided to do this for this particular iteration, but we could take these pieces and reconfigure them by displacing the center, for instance, or even flipping the piece, or mirroring the piece to connect it differently. And in that way, you can trigger many other iterations. Even So this is to say that there is a lot of playfulness that this project is still promising, no? And that have so many opportunities that you can also play virtually, physically change the rules, but the ingredients are there. And there are so many spatial conditions that can emerge from this, like looking at your plans, it looks like there is a tendency towards the grid, towards the abstract orthogonal square grid. However, there are also opportunities for disobeying that grid by maybe displacing those centers that I was talking earlier, and flipping the pieces, creating patterns of, where there is a tendency towards the grid, but there is also inscribed in the instructions the possibilities of disobeying them. And so there is the thicknesses that this can produce, the system of circulations, adding on to what Andrew said earlier. It's incredibly rich. So I'm really excited for you to continue to the next phase.
Going to continue. Yeah, I love the project. It's beautiful. It's super fun. I love Touche Tyler. It's one of the things I kind of like keep on a grasshopper. Learn how to do it, so I love it. I work with students who love it. So I love this kind of interpretation that you have with it. I think it's to follow up on those comments about shifting the centroid point and you break that grid. But the advantage of your piece is that it can move and operate and orient in multiple directions, and it's one of the things it can. And you can form various densities from that. It's kind of a dense piece branch off in a direction and have another density. And so I think then it creates those interesting in-between moments, right? That you can sort of fill and space fill. And I think that's where maybe in the representation is not there yet. So maybe if you had maybe a better site condition, right? Sort of a generic overlay on photo, but really gauge yourself at the site and make yourself kind of work within those constraints. You might have applied it in a more unique way or dynamic way. And really explored the potential of it. To kind of talk about the fabrication of it, I mean, it sort of really makes me nervous. I mean, that's a lot of work. Like, change the little face, it's sort of crazy. I mean, would you do it that way again? It's not like a stuff. Early on in the project, we came to keep getting concerned about laser cutting appointments. Because just like the sheer number of hours into the laser cutting for basically 2 weeks straight. That's wild. I mean, yeah, I know. I mean, it's a box. So I mean, it's like get an Amazon box and take it apart, right? The Amazon box has like one glue flap or two glue flaps. I mean, it's a series of connected surfaces that are unrolled flat, right? So you need to like maybe learn from that idea, right? And maybe the material is not optimal. Maybe that's not the right choice. It could be, you could put it on the mill and put a 45-degree V mill on there and V mill all those joint lines, then fold it and get a beautiful box. That would take some like effort to figure out something. It's off here or something. I don't know that. Very, very hard. But it could just be cardboard. It could be a number of other paper materials that are more lightweight, easier to cut, faster to cut, and you just fold them up and move them, right? And then you could have built this thing 3 times, right?
For us to, I think that would come of our material. Yeah, to use like a wood or an MDF. But yeah, we're given free reign.
Why you cheated to use cardstock?
You're right. Better.
There's always a way out.
Look at the way out. Right? I mean, you should get us a software called Hyperlapse. It's $30. It's used to make these animate characters. But it's a really powerful software because what it'll do is it'll take all of these modules, you can put that in there, and it'll create all your fab files. It'll create all your tabbing, it'll create everything. Creates all the dash lines. So the advantage of cutting a dash line is you control 2 directions, right? Versus a score with 1 direction. So it gives you more opportunity to create more dynamic pieces like this little knuckle here that needs to fold in multiple directions. That's a challenging piece to make, right? So that's when you start to get all these separations and gaps. You can fold it, right? Work with your folding strategy and roll it. So hypercurve.
I mean,
There's
there's
such masks.
Yeah, it's something like for DIY crafts.
Yeah.
It's for everyone, it's very easy to use, but you can do so much with it. We use it.
So like, find ways to cheat. You go through it and like cheat fabrication, get faster. because that's a lot of labor. I mean, it's sort of frightening.
Team effort.
I like there's something that's really cool about it, in that it looks like it moves a lot more than it does. Like the curves look like they could slide, and like these things look like you can pop them off and pop them back on, and it, like the illusion of it is cool too, you know. It just branching off of like the faking kind of idea. So yeah, you fooled me. So that's something.
But thank you so much. Great. Yeah.
Oh my God.
Already had enough things for you.
Yes.
Our product is carving mentality. My name is.
I'm Rob.
Feel free to look around and look at a lot of reference. So this project is an exploration of everyday polyhedra that forms an infinite film. This base unit is derived from an original infinite polyhedra, which is an aggregation of identical units and subspaces that are separate from each other. So we iterated upon the base unit by transforming the planar unit into two different units, which both have four curved surfaces. In the original form,